Hi there, Sarah Merritt here. This is video number 2 of my copyright assignment outlining my use of the Assure model. In this video, I will outline the steps that I took to analyze learners, respond to state standards and objectives, select strategies and resources, utilize resources, require learner participation, and finally, evaluate learners. For the purpose of this presentation, I chose to analyze learners on my own campus. The general characteristics included an 8th grade classroom comprised of 13 and 14-year-olds. This is a full inclusion classroom with a mixture of students below, on, and above grade level. In a Title I school with low socioeconomic status. It is an urban setting with a majority Black and Brown student population, and Mrs. Stewart, the teacher in our scenario, has strong classroom management structures in place, but some students struggle with engagement and participation. When considering the entry competencies, I kept in mind that most of the students are digital natives socially, but they lack many professional and educational digital skills. All of the students lack knowledge about copyright laws. Knowing that this is a full inclusion classroom with a mixture of students below, on, and above grade level, the learning differences and needs are especially important to me. For my differently abled students, I provided access to closed captioning, visuals on every slide, printed notes. My last slide with the how had 4 supplemental videos. And then finally, on our final assessment, I also provide color coding. For the gifted students above grade level, they would be given the option to draft, via writing or drawing, their own scenarios to represent copyright rules and exception, as opposed to doing the matching assignment. And lastly, I catered to several learning preferences, again with access to closed captioning, access to the recorded lessons so they could set the pace, access to visuals, videos, a graphic organizer, and in the final product, they had the option to either do the matching game or the creation. And the matching is a tactile assessment. Here's a look at the state standards and objectives I felt best fit this lesson. For the state standards, I referred to both the ISTE standards for students as well as the AASL standards framework for learners. The ISTE standards for students maintain that students demonstrate an understanding of and respect for the rights and obligations of using and sharing intellectual property, while the AASL standards framework for learners maintains that learners use valid information and reasoned conclusions to make ethical decisions in the creation of knowledge by ethically using and reproducing others' works. These 2 state standards informed the lesson objectives that I rolled out to students. The lesson objectives are, given a graphic organizer, 8th grade students will be able to identify and explain all copyright rules. Additionally, given a list of 10 authentic scenarios, 8th grade students will be able to match at least 8 of the 10 scenarios to their corresponding copyright rule or exception. To select my strategies and resources, I kept in mind both teacher and student-centered strategies. For my teacher-centered strategies, I knew that 0% of students had copyright prior knowledge. Therefore, I did a presentation-style approach to outline the lesson goals and introduction to new material. And if I was actually presenting this to students, I would also explicitly roll out the assessment guidelines within my presentation. For my student-centered strategies, I intentionally provided a graphic organizer to promote note-taking and understanding. I knew we were dealing with complicated legal matters, and so I wanted to ensure that students had a way to organize all of the information. And again, if I were to roll this out to students, they would have been introduced to a multi-level matching activity at the end of the lesson to promote synthesis and demonstrate learning. The resources I used included a PowerPoint presentation, a graphic organizer, access to 4 supplemental videos, and eventually a matching activity. The materials I used were new materials, such as a graphic organizer, the final assessment matching activity, and the rubric. I also relied upon available materials when choosing my supplemental videos in case students needed more access to information. Next, I'll walk through how I utilized these resources. To begin, I previewed my resources by doing several run-throughs of the PowerPoint before recording, and I would have done the same even if I was presenting in front of a real group of students. Next, I prepared my resources. I prepared a graphic organizer after I created my student PowerPoint, so I knew what key things students need to take notes on with the assessment in mind. I also recorded the presentation in order to include both visual and audio components to tailor to several learning styles. And if this were a real class, I would ask Mrs. Stewart to remind her students to bring headphones in order to view the supplemental videos, and I would of course bring a few extra of my own the day of, knowing that some students would probably forget. Here are the steps I would have taken to prepare the environment. I would know I would present with the computer and projector in Mrs. Stewart's class. So ahead of time, I would ensure that the projector is working, that there is a table close by to rest my computer, and that all student desks are positioned to see the screen while still providing me ample walkway in order to circulate. All of this I would have done in advance. Additionally, knowing that students would need access to computers, I would also ensure that students are within reach of an outlet, surge protector, or charging station so that the lesson wouldn't be disrupted. I prepared the learners in my video by explicitly stating the standard learning objective and previewing the final output at the beginning of lesson so students knew what the goal was and what we were working towards. And lastly, I provided the learning experience by giving the presentation, reminding students of key concepts throughout. And as I'm presenting in person, I would be circulating to ensure students are taking appropriate notes. And on the actual final assessment, I would have also circulated to provide in the moment feedback. I was very intentional about the decisions I made to require learner participation, knowing that I was giving a lecture style presentation. So to promote student practices, all students were given a graphic organizer, or if they were differently able, they were given a fill in the blank notes to promote note-taking and understanding throughout the lecture. I thought it was very important for students to have an opportunity and a means to synthesize and sort through the information, even if I was the one talking the entire time. Next, I kept in mind the final assessment I had planned for students. And in this final assessment, students would have been prompted to work in groups to read 10 real-world scenarios and determine whether copyright laws have been broken. From there, they would have been prompted to match each scenario to the corresponding copyright rule or copyright exception. I was very intentional about making this hands-on, knowing that the first 15 minutes of my lesson was purely teacher talk. And while students will work in groups, all students would have been physically manipulating their own matching activity so that it was able to promote 100% participation while also promoting connection and collaboration. If I were presenting this in person, I would give feedback through circulation. I would circulate during the lecture and matching activity to provide in-the-moment feedback. And then afterwards, I will use the rubric I created to provide feedback post-lessons so students can continue to learn from their mistakes. For the final step of the Assure model, evaluate, I created a matching activity as a means to assess learner achievement and mastery of copyright content. When rolling this out to students, I would show them a slide like this and tell them to work with their group to read the 10 provided scenarios to determine whether copyright laws have been broken. Students would be prompted to physically sort these 10 scenarios into a yes, copyright laws have been broken column, or a no, copyright laws have not been broken column. From there, they will be prompted to sort those scenarios into the corresponding copyright rule or copyright exception. Knowing that students would most likely need an example of this, I would tell them, for example, if you determine that the person is breaking a copyright rule, match it to the rule they are breaking, such as an unlawful reproduction of work, an unlawful distribution of work, an unlawful derivative work, an unlawful public performance, or an unlawful public display. And students would have to read the scenario to determine which of those conditions it broke. If the student determined that the person is not breaking a copyright rule, they would then need to match it to the exception that protected the person in the scenario, such as fair use, public domain, or one of the 4 categories I covered in my presentation that were not protected under copyright. Here's the rubric that I would use to evaluate student mastery on that matching activity. And on this rubric, I highlight 4 specific criteria that I thought were critical for students to demonstrate their understanding of copyright. In step 1 of the matching activity, students were demonstrating whether or not they could determine copyright infringement. In step 2 of the matching activity, students were to demonstrate their understanding of specific copyright rules and specific copyright exceptions. And finally, throughout the lecture, students were to demonstrate that they could take adequate notes in order to organize and synthesize the information that I was giving them. This concludes the presentation outlining the steps I took to internalize the Assure model. Thank you so much for your time and attention. Have a great day.